After the animal remains were found and moved to the side, we used a backhoe to come in, and the backhoe then excavated that initial, what I'm estimating to be 10 foot by 10 foot area. And the backhoe went approximately 2 feet down after that in that approximately 10 foot by 10 foot area. And we also took, for this area and all areas, we have measurements, that we shot in, so we know exactly on this property where that area was. So we know this approximately 10 foot by 10 foot area. We know where that is on the property. We know where burial site 1 was on the property. We know where burial site 2 is on the property, eventually when we get there. So the backhoe started excavating this area.
Okay. And what happened as the backhoe started what happened after that?
So once the backhoe had kind of processed this 10 foot by 10 foot area, gone approximately 2 feet down, the backhoe started to expand from the 10 foot by 10 foot area, going a little bit north. And as that backhoe was expanding from our original 10 foot by 10 foot area, the backhoe uncovers 2 potential vertebrae. And we stop and we have our anthropologist make an assessment on those bones. Are they animal? Are they human? Our anthropologist couldn't make the determination with those 2 bones at that time. As I'm standing there waiting for the assessment to be made from the anthropologist, I caught an odor that I can associate with my experience with possibly being decomposing, human remains.
Okay.
And between waiting for the anthropologist to make an assessment that she can't make yet, and then smelling the possible, odor that I'm familiar with of possibly being decomposing flesh, I made the decision, okay, we're going to stop using the tractor. Let's get the tractor out of the way, and then let's have the team focus on hand tools, and let's see what we come up with right here. Okay. This is interesting.
So when you recovered the 2 animals you talked about, did you experience that same smell?
No, I did not.
Okay. So you said you moved on to hand tools. Tell us what happened then.
So as the team was excavating this area, just a little bit north, kind of at the right of, I'd say, I'm estimating right now, kind of at the north side of our 10 foot by 10 foot original pet cemetery area, we eventually, the next significant thing is we hit a bone, sticking out of the ground, and it kind of leads into some flesh. And at the time, our anthropologist still can't make a determination if that's animal or human. And so the team starts trying to excavate whatever this is. And then eventually we're able to excavate a few pieces. The major piece ends up being a pelvic piece.
And is that something you recognize as being a pelvic piece?
I'll say possible pelvic piece, but I mean, a pelvic piece is pretty familiar to me. So I would say I could recognize it, but I'll say possible pelvic piece.
And what else did you find that day?
So that was significant. These pieces at that time was significant. Once the team, recovered those pieces, based on those pieces that were recovered, the anthropologist...
I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Without testifying as to what the anthropologist told you,
okay,
did you ask the anthropologist to make an assessment?
Yes.
Okay. And what happened in your search after that?
So that was essentially that was where we stopped processing for the day.
Okay.
So that became we knew at that point we had found human remains. So that was where we stopped processing for the day. That became then burial site number 2. I then made a new perimeter, a new outline of where our new excavation site would be for burial site number 2. based off those remains we just found. And that's all going to be mapped in. So we have the data for those, for this new area. And that's burial site number 2 now. And then that's essentially where we ended for day 1.
Okay.
And then the pieces that were recovered, and those pieces appeared to be burned. Some of them were pink still, so there's a lot of tissue still involved. And then again, it was pieces, so dismembered. And then those pieces were put in a body bag. The coroner was there, sealed up by the coroner, and then removed from the scene. So all human remains from day 1 were taken,
Okay. And to your knowledge, was the scene secured at that point?
Yeah, and then so all general evidence, so besides the human remains, which is what we've been focused on, there was a lot of other searching going on, taking place. All general evidence from the day was sealed up, documented, through our paperwork. And then that was all provided to the Rexburg Police Department, and that was handed off to them at the end of day 1.
Okay.
And then the scene was secured. The local police, Fremont County Sheriff's Office, Rexburg Police Department secured the scene overnight, and then ERT departed late in the afternoon on day 1.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd ask that this exhibit marked as State's Exhibit 26 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 26 will be shown to the witness.
Agent, do you recognize Exhibit 26?
I do.
What is it?
It's another photograph that our photographer would have taken.
Okay, and is that incorporated in your report?
It is.
And is that a true and accurate representation of what you observed at what we've called burial site number 2?
Yes. Burial site number 2 in the pet cemetery.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd ask that State's Exhibit 26 be entered into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
Exhibit 26 will be admitted.
And then I'd ask that this exhibit marked as State's Exhibit 27 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 27 is being shown to the witness.
Agent, do you recognize Exhibit 27?
I do.
What is it?
That shows burial site number 2, and those are the stakes that I put up to mark the perimeter of burial site number 2 once we had identified the human remains.
Okay. And is that a true and accurate representation of what you observed at burial site number 2?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move for State's Exhibit 27 to be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 27 will be admitted.
Agent, you talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, how you started excavating, or at some point you were excavating burial site number 2 with the backhoe, correct?
Correct.
And then you expanded your search northward.
Correct.
Is State's Exhibit 27, as you compare that with State's Exhibit 26, is that spot in 27, is that northward of where you originally started excavating site with the backhoe?
It's kind of right on that border.
Okay.
And so it's kind of hard to tell without looking at the final data from our Faro scanner and our total station. It's kind of hard for me from these photos to say if they overlap or not. So we kind of need to wait till we see that final data.
Okay. Exhibit 27, is that the area where you discovered the bones that you talked about on day one?
Yes,
Okay.
the bones that were eventually for burial site number 2.
Okay. Now, yes, thank you for burial site number 2. Thank you. And did you resume your search or your excavation on June 10th?
Yes, so June 10th, in the morning, we arrived back on scene, and we would have started a similar process, crime scene sign-in log, entry photos again to show how that scene is at that time. I would have started another, for the team leader, I would have started another admin log that I would have filled out, and then another preliminary survey. And then our primary, we had a lot of objectives, but the primary objectives were obviously to finish the excavation of burial site number 2. And I think we were still finishing the processing of the fire pit area. And we haven't really talked about that, but finishing the fire pit area.
Okay. Can you tell the court what you found on day 2 at burial site number 2?
So burial site number 2, it was a little bit more complex for us, I think, but it was the same process. There's a story to be told here at this grave, so we want to do the same thing, layer by layer, noting any significance. The difficulty, I think, for us for this one was the way these human remains were found. So it was kind of this, for lack of a better term, it was kind of a mass of dismembered human remains. Burnt, partially burnt. And so we did the best we could. It was kind of hard to recognize, like, what are we looking at here initially? You know, what is this? Mm-hmm. We know there's tissue here, there's organic matter here, and we just couldn't recognize what we were dealing with. But layer by layer, we ended up just excavating all around this mass of human remains. And we ended up excavating all the way around it. And at the very bottom of this mass, we find, this melted green bucket. And then to the bottom, the side of that green bucket, we eventually find a skull. And then to the side of that skull, we find a mandible with some teeth. Those are the significant things that you could finally see and recognize out of this mass.
Okay.
And so we did the team did the best they could to kind of excavate around this and kind of tell that story. And again, we'd stop every so often, take photos, take scans, and document that excavation process, just like we did at the burial site 1, layer by layer. And then eventually, it came the decision point of, okay, now we need to try to lift these remains out of burial site 2.
What happened when you tried to do that?
So when the team tried to lift the remains, this mass out of burial site 2, it fell apart. So what ends up happening is just a removal of pieces into the coroner's body bag. And then once we get the pieces into the body bag, our anthropologist and the coroner essentially do, as best they can, an inventory of what pieces we have, so that I know, as the team leader, how much more do we need to look for in this grave? Because I don't want to leave at the end of the day with only partial remains and there's something else in there. And so even after the bigger parts of the mass and pieces are removed, the team, we still need to continue, digging out this grave, going further than what the pieces we saw were, sifting. And the sifting operation, we didn't talk about that, but the sifting operation happened in burial 1 also. A sifting operation continues in burial site number 2, and we're looking for any other pieces of evidence We're looking for small pieces of bone, small teeth. So we continue those operations until we think we've got all the human remains, so that we can give get everything out of there. And then one thing that we also did was, even once we finished that process, we used the backhoe to go even deeper and wider at each of these burial locations, just to ensure, we got everything.
Mm-hmm. And did you find anything else at either site 1 or 2 when you did that expansion search?
We did not.
Okay. Thank you. And once all those remains were, you may have already answered this, I apologize if you did. Once those remains were all removed from the ground, what did you do with them?
The coroner would have sealed the body bags, and then the coroner would have removed them from the scene.
Okay. All right, thank you. Agent,